Ladies and gentlemen, this is huge. Associated Press, Trump asks the Supreme Court to block sentencing. Vox, Trump asks the Supreme Court to place him even further above the law. That's amusing. Fox News, Trump files petition to Supreme Court. New York Times, Trump asks Supreme Court to halt sentencing. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. I have been telling you for months and months that President Trump is going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will eventually overturn the verdict. They will overturn the guilty verdict and the sentencing eventually. Friday, he might actually be sentenced, which would expedite sentenced to no prison. So note, it was a conditional discharge. I think that there could be a sentencing, but the sentence, an unconditional discharge. He could get an unconditional discharge sentence on Friday, which would then expedite the Supreme Court looking at it and overturning the guilty verdict. They could very well block the sentencing. I think what they'll do is reverse and block and overturn everything when they actually get it in front of them to look at whether the verdict was constitutional. It was not constitutional. Hit subscribe. Paul Bartlett, thank you so very much. Listen to this, and then we'll get to my analysis, further analysis. It was not constitutional at all. This is John Yoo explaining why.
And the election there too, no?
Mark, I appreciate what you said in your opening statement, because the Supreme Court has made clear, not just in one offside comment, in three very clear decisions, that only the federal government can enforce federal law. Only the Justice Department and the Federal Election Commission can prosecute and bring suit for violations of federal election law. They're the guardians of how federal election should run. And so what happened here is grab the authority away and basically decided to prosecute his own interpretation of federal law. That's not permissible under our separation of powers and federalism. And the Supreme Court will reverse if, as you say, Mark, they get a chance to hear this case.
John Yoo, the Supreme Court will reverse. Anyone looking at this, not just a legal scholar like John Yoo, anyone looking at this through the vantage point of reality knows that a state cannot level a federal crime at anyone without the Department of Justice, and in this case, the FEC involved. To my super chat, thank you. Paul Bartlett, thank you. Hit subscribe, everyone. This is huge, huge news. In addition to the immunity victory, which is one of the main reasons it will be overturned, in addition to the fact, like our system of federalism, exactly what John Yoo stated, a state cannot level a federal crime at anyone without the Department of Justice leveling a federal indictment. This is just, you don't have to be a legal scholar to understand. These are simple concepts. If you don't understand this and you're a legal scholar, then you have major issues. But there wasn't even a federal crime cited in the indictment, and there was a vague reference to a number of laws that a state does not have the right under our Constitution to interpret unilaterally. Listen to a former FEC chairman. And Paul, thank you to my super chat. Thank you so very much. We're at 271, people. We're on our way to 300, and it's because of you. Thank you so very much for helping this channel grow.
Hans, what was the underlying federal campaign violation? Did we ever find that out?
Well, you know, there was nothing in the original indictment about any kind of federal campaign violation. They kept saying that the legal expenses, which is what were listed in the business records, should have been a campaign-related expense, the payment that was made to Stormy Daniels. But as Brad Smith, I know, would have testified, under the test applied by the FEC, this was not a campaign-related expense, period. There's just no question about that. So for this jury to say that oh yeah, he violated federal campaign finance laws, and that justifies the underlying verdict. That is such an egregious mistake that the Court of Appeals in New York, when they get this case, they ought to reverse this almost immediately because of this and so many other mistakes made in the case.
So the Supreme Court might wait until the unconditional discharge with no jail, no prison, to then see the case and overturn it. They might actually simply just do that. Okay? So he might get sentenced. The media will have a field day. Oh, he's a convicted felon. Yeah, Tammany Hall went after a presidential rival who eventually won the popular vote. Nobody believes, and hit subscribe to this channel, nobody believes Trump was a Kremlin operative. Nobody believes he tried to foment a rebellion. Nobody believes he said both sides, which he didn't. He condemned that one side, that fateful day, 5 years ago now? No, more than that. 8 years ago? Okay. Nobody believes that he told anyone to ingest anything. Nobody believes that, what's the other nonsense? Oh, that he cheated on his taxes. That was actually Hunter, allegedly. Or I think that it's still ongoing, or he was sentenced. Who knows? We can look back. The issue is that Hunter's laptop was likely full of bribery and graft. That's what the big story was. Okay, and then they ignored all the conflicts of interests when it comes to courts and judges going after Trump. Every single step of the way, Trump won. The constitutional presidential immunity victory, he won. The Colorado ban was overturned. The January defendants, even Justice Jackson, sided. He won 3 major Supreme Court cases. And the Supreme Court knows that politics is involved with all of this. This is Bradley Smith. Again, Nicholas. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you so very, very much. Greatly appreciated. Greatly appreciated, Nicholas. Thank you. Thank you. To my super chat, thank you. This is another FEC chairman, Bradley Smith. You heard from Hans von Spakovsky. This is another FEC chairman stating a state cannot level a federal statute at an individual without the FEC or Department of Justice involved. Then we'll get to the immunity victory also. Then we'll get to potential misconduct in the court. And then we'll get to the fact that this is so blatantly partisan. But anyway, let's continue. Hit subscribe. Nicholas, Paul, to my super chat. Thank you.
Right. Well, this raises yet another question. Can, of course, a state prosecutor prosecute an alleged, quote, federal crime that the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice have already decided not to prosecute? We might think about it this way. Imagine if New York just passed a law saying it is a violation of the New York Penal Code to violate any federal law. And then we'll decide what federal law is violated, right? That would subvert the entire federal state structure of law. I mean, that would allow state DAs to start prosecuting anything they think is a violation of federal law, even though the federal courts or federal administrative agencies or the Department of Justice had thought it was not a violation of federal law. So it's really getting into sort of wacky legal theories, but also I think very dangerous theories. Again, if we think about the rule of law, I don't think this can be emphasized enough that if Trump had paid for these with campaign funds, which the DA says he had to have done, I think they'd probably be chasing him today for illegal conversion of campaign funds to pay this personal expense.
We don't know.
Number 1, it was not a campaign finance violation. Hans von Spakovsky, you heard prior to Bradley Smith. You'll hear Trey Traynor in a second. 3 former FEC chairmen have stated it was not a Federal Election Commission violation. The FEC looked at it, dropped the case. Number 2, the DOJ looked at it, dropped the case. Number 3. Number 4, the immunity victory that Trump received as Democrats tried to ruin him Democrats tried to weaken the presidency and only made the presidency stronger. That's how utterly inept they are. They literally set out to weaken the presidency because, God forbid, Trump might again win the popular vote, which he did. Win the popular, regain the Oval Office, and in this instance, win the popular vote. Trump won the popular vote, the Senate, the House, every battleground state, the presidency, and he has the Supreme Court, which again gave him presidential immunity for official acts. To all the deranged, hyperventilating, never-endingly indignant, morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrats, official acts trying to end someone's life who's a political opponent is not an official act. Trump is not immune if, God forbid, he or Biden or anyone wanted to end the life of an American rival. That's not an official act. Again, you'd have to be a complete and utter imbecile to think that Trump was protected for official acts and ending someone's life who's a political rival is an official act. It's not. Okay, but we're going to still focus on the fact there was no FEC crime. Trump could have paid Stormy with dollar bills. It wouldn't have mattered.
Well, we know why they're not indicted, right?
This is Bradley Smith again, a former FEC chairman, explaining yet again there was no crime that Trump committed. Not only does the state of New York have no right under our Constitution to level a federal statute against Trump when the DOJ said we're going to drop the case. When the federal government decided not to level a federal statute at Trump, why on earth did the state decide unilaterally to do so? If you're a legal scholar, if you are this wonderful constitutional scholar, or you're an attorney or lawyer or whatever, and you can't answer that question, or you don't know it's purely politically motivated, that's the answer. It's a rhetorical question. Why did the state of New York unilaterally decide that Trump committed a federal crime when the federal government decided he did not? Oh, that's right. It's purely politics. That's why he won the popular vote.
Because we don't want to indict them. But no, it's a good example of things that influence the campaign. And it's worth noting that under the FEC's regulations, if you're an incumbent office holder, you're presumed to be running for re-election. So you're all presumed to be candidates unless they've announced that they're not seeking re-election. So they would be candidates, and this is something that they probably did to influence their future campaign or their perception as office holders. And one thing that's worth adding here, Mark, is because I hear this from people all the time, and even some other, election people who know election law, lawyers, and some former other commissioners will say, yes, but it was to influence an election. But the FEC in its regulations very specifically rejected the idea that even as to whether it was primarily to influence the election or not, and choosing instead this test that it has to be an obligation that was created for the election. In other words, they didn't want to get into the question of trying to guess, well, did they do this primarily for the election or primarily for personal purposes? And it's very specific about that in the regulations. And I think that's a very important point that people need to keep in mind. And that was done actually to make it more objective and actually to prevent candidates from using their campaign funds for personal use. But, that's the flip side. And I tell people, imagine if you're a lawyer for the Trump campaign and you want to do it all right. You've got one provision of the statute says I have to pay it with campaign funds. Another provision seems to say I can't pay it with campaign funds. Somebody's going to get them coming or going, and that's part of the problem.
So if you're a lawyer,
there was no criminal violation. There was no federal law that Trump broke. He had every right to ask Stormy or anyone else to sign a non-disclosure agreement, pay them in the contract. If anything, the hilarious part of all of this is that Stormy likely broke a non-disclosure agreement. Well, if indeed they did have a one-night, relationship, which let's say likely they did. Okay, it's very likely they did. It's not been proven in a court of law, though. It's not nothing has been proven other than a state has leveled a federal law that the federal government did not level against Trump, which is not only unconstitutional, such a blatant, brazen, overt political attempt at going after a political rival. Again, you'd have to be completely ignorant not to realize this is unconstitutional. Of course it's unconstitutional. The issue, though, is now the immunity victory for official acts ties directly to the court decision to convict Trump, because Hope Hicks, for example, and Michael Cohen possibly spoke to Trump while he was president. Those are official acts. It is an official act to speak to your legal counsel as president. It is an official act to perform a speech, even one that precedes criminal activity that has nothing to do with your speech. Okay? It's still an official act. He said go peacefully, and certain people didn't go peacefully, and perhaps, possibly, they were linked to some effort to undermine Trump for the next 4 years, but that's according to Vivek Ramaswamy and maybe even congressional testimony, or what isn't said during congressional testimony. But anyway, well, we found out we found out a whole bunch in the last couple of months. But anyway, the issue is such a blatant, overt, partisan attempt at getting Trump. Democrats are like the Keystone Cops of political nonsense. They run around hyperventilating with the most hilarious histrionics, yelling at the top of their lungs, only to completely lose every single Supreme Court challenge and the popular vote to Trump. They lost to a man who allegedly is going to be a convicted felon. Now, if he's a convicted felon for a month or 2 months before the Supreme Court overturns it, that'll be even greater of a monumental victory for Trump. But 100% the Supreme Court will overturn the verdict, the guilty verdict. They might not look at the case Friday, allow New York to convict him, and without prison, no jail, no prison, and then look at the case saying, hey, wait a second, you can't have this hanging over a presidency. It's completely unconstitutional, and he's also protected not only because of our system of federalism that doesn't allow a state to level a federal crime without the DOJ involved, but also because he's protected under presidential immunity. Again, the Democrats tried to weaken the presidency. They only made the presidency stronger. Literally everything Democrats do, the opposite happens.
Incoming counselor to President-elect Trump, Alina Habba. Alina, we love talking to you. It's wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. First, do you have any more details on the alleged misconduct by the juror in this case?
I do, as part of, obviously I'm part of the team, but those are not ones that I am willing to share at this point. What I can tell you is it's definitely egregious, despite the redactions, and without getting into detail, it is not a questionable thing. There was misconduct by the jurors, and it would have anything thrown out. Now, one thing we are learning, as you've delicately said, but I will say more directly, Judge Merchan's description of what happened and what falls under the Supreme Court's decision is so flawed and egregious and so ridiculous. He is completely disregarding the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court that said that there is presidential immunity for official acts. And now he is trying to carve out in any way he can to preserve face and say that this trial was not a complete hoax, was not a complete disaster, an evidentiary disaster. And now we know there were issues with the jury being tainted. So, this is where we are. And this is where we've been for 3.5 years. And frankly, why I think we won.
Alina, so we've got allegations of a juror's misconduct in the case. Can you please tell us how this case is ripe for appeal? Legal experts have told us there are a lot of constitutional violations. The jury wrongly heard.
Then we have potential misconduct and potential constitutional issues within the court. I mean, Supreme Court precedent, immunity, system of federalism, a state cannot level a federal crime at anyone without the DOJ involved. It wasn't even an FEC crime, okay, according to Hanze von Spakovsky, Trey Traynor, and Bradley Smith, 3 former FEC chairmen, but we trust the wonderful, amazing experts only when it suits Democrats. That's why every vapid slogan that Democrats utilize in the most overt, sad, hilarious public relations attempt will trust the wonderful, amazing, brilliant experts. Well, we have FEC experts stating Trump didn't commit a crime. Oh, that's right. A state can unilaterally decide. Is that the rebuttal? Oh, the state of New York decided. Oh, okay. Well, they're not the Federal Election Commission. Sorry.
Evidence that was protected by presidential immunity, the Supreme Court upheld, like President Trump's conversations with Hope Hicks. The judge delayed sentencing indefinitely. That's clearly a due process right to a speedy trial violation. And now juror misconduct. It sounds like that juror was tainted. There could have been bias here.
Yeah, let's add some to that. Statute of limitations, which before they brought this, we knew was.
The statute of limitations expired. These were misdemeanors. These were not felonies. Michael Cohen started a corporation to pay Stormy after she signed a non-disclosure agreement. This isn't rocket science. This isn't like astrophysics. This is so simple to understand. Even the morally superior, highly educated, who are always indignant about everything but don't know the facts, they can understand this. Michael Cohen does not have any proof that Trump told him to pay Stormy. But even if Trump paid Stormy with dollar bills, it wouldn't have been an FEC crime. But Michael Cohen wrote the non-disclosure agreement and then started a corporation and then funneled his own money into the corporation and then paid Stormy. Not only was it not campaign funds, it wasn't even Trump's money. Okay, then he paid with 34 checks, and they're like, 34 felony counts. And then the average person is like, what? 34 felonies, what? And if you don't like Trump, you're like, 34 felonies, oh my God, the rule of law. These were 34 payments in the form of, I believe, 34 checks to Stormy. I think the total was about $100,000, something like that. Okay? So that wasn't even a crime. Under the FEC, that's not a crime at all. But if it was a crime, the FEC, like one of the viewers is saying, twice looked at it, dropped the case. But even if the FEC said it was a crime, if the DOJ dropped the case, there's no case. The DOJ didn't even. Biden's own Department of Justice, that was leveled completely against Trump in the most overtly partisan manner. These are the same authoritarians and despots and tyrants that they claim Trump is, but they're actually very sly authoritarians, tyrants, and despots utilizing absurd leaps of logic, bureaucracy, and state and federal legal systems against Trump. But anyway, it wasn't even an FEC crime. If it was, the FEC would have said so, but then the DOJ would have had to have indicted Trump. But they didn't. But then you have the issue of presidential immunity, which erases Hope Hicks's testimony and possibly Michael Cohen's testimony.
Was passed. This case was passed up by Cy Vance. It was passed up prior by Bragg, and then it was brought again. How about we also discuss that the White House was coordinating and sent their own guy into work for the New York DA from the DOJ? How about that? How about selective prosecution, election interference, tying this man up in a hoax case during an election cycle when he should have been campaigning? How about all of the things you said? But this is where we have problems. The judge should have recused. We've said it time and time again. We have one thing standing right now before all the appeals we will take on this ridiculous decision today. And that is the motion to dismiss that this judge gave us leave to file.
You know,
I don't have much hope in Judge Merchan, but we do have pending motions. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Alina. So, Senator Chuck Grassley, excuse me, has said this is really scary that all Americans, right or left, he's saying take the politics out of it. When you see the lawfare abuses, it could happen to you. It could happen to viewers. That's why millennial voters, we heard, were so scared about what the Justice Department and what cases like D.A. Bragg brought. They feel it could happen to them personally. This was a books and records misdemeanor, like a parking ticket, but it got ramped up into 34 felonies. That's terrifying for the American judicial system. Final word.
Yes. Yes, and he was not there. He was in the White House as president. These are acts that were done by an accounting team at the Trump Organization. And
it was Clinton and the DNC, the same wonderful human being who won the Medal of Freedom, which was awesome in so many ways. That is the perfect picture of the Biden administration right there. Just in all its completely irrational glory, but comical. But anyway, it was Clinton and the DNC who purchased a Steele dossier and received a Federal Election Commission fine. Fines were leveled, okay? Fines were leveled against the DNC for the Steele dossier. Okay, so Trump they didn't even give a fine. I think President Obama paid the largest fine for an FEC violation in U.S. history also.
there is so many uncanny things happening here, and the American people are afraid, and they should be afraid, but not anymore, because I can assure you that when we go in and when this administration gets to work, it will be top of mind to fix this lawfare and prosecution against a political opponent or any American. It should not happen.
Okay, Alina Habba, thank you so much.
So you're going to hear right now exactly why they're going to overturn. I mean, it's already a done deal. They've already overturned the guilty verdict essentially with the immunity victory. But then there are so many other the issue regarding federalism. A state can't level a federal crime without the DOJ involved. The fact that it wasn't even an FEC crime to begin with. And a state cannot interpret federal laws unilaterally. They need the federal government to be on board with them and level, the statute. But this is John Roberts saying, you haven't explained what's an official and unofficial act. We're going to give President Trump immunity for official acts. Oh, and by the way, the Hope Hicks testimony and possibly the Michael Cohen testimony relate directly to what you're about to hear.
The Court of Appeals below, whose decision we're reviewing, said, quote, a former president can be prosecuted for his official acts because the fact of the prosecution means that the former president has allegedly acted in defiance of the laws. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think it sounds tautologically true, but I want to underscore that the obligation of a president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed.
Well, I think it sounds tautologically true as well, and that, I think, is the clearest statement of the court's holding, which is why it concerns me. As I read it, it says simply, a former president can be prosecuted because he's being prosecuted.
Well, I would not suggest that that's either the proper approach in this case or certainly not the government's approach. A prosecution does, of course, invoke federal criminal law. The allegations have to be presented to a grand jury, which votes upon the indictment.
Well, that's what I mean, shortly after that statement in the court,
So Justice Roberts is saying, well, how do we know this isn't politically motivated? And Jack Smith's counsel is saying, well, it would never be politically motivated. I mean, look, you have to get an indictment from a grand jury, and there's so many laws we have to abide by, and we would never, ever, ever utilize bureaucracy and the legal system against our political opponents. In fact, the legal system doesn't even allow that. It's like, yeah, it does. Democrats are absolutely, the only thing they're actually good at, not governing, not the economy, not foreign policy, but they're very good, very, very good at utilizing the law to try to ruin people. In this case, it could never have worked against Trump because he's a billionaire, number one, but he was also innocent of everything they went after him for. That's the main thing.
The court's opinion, that's what they said, but there's no reason to worry because the prosecutor will act in good faith, and there's no reason to worry because a grand jury will have returned the indictment. Now, you know how easy it is in many cases for a prosecutor to get a grand jury to bring an indictment, and reliance on the good faith of the prosecutor may not be enough in some cases. I'm not suggesting here. So if it's tautological, and those are the only protections that the Court of Appeals below gave, and that is no longer your position, you're not defending that position, why shouldn't we either send it back to the Court of Appeals or issue an opinion making clear that that's not the law?
Well, I am.
So the Supreme Court isn't sending any verdict, in this case, back to any Court of Appeals, because Trump has already gone through the Court of Appeals in New York, and they keep siding with the initial verdict, the guilty verdict. The problem here is that the Supreme Court might block it outright and say, nah, you can't do that. They might allow the sentencing to take place Friday, and then that actually expedites. It's actually a really good thing. It's actually a really good thing if he is sentenced to no prison time, no jail time. The good thing is that, well, Democrats will jump up for joy. Oh, he's a convicted felon. And everyone will just roll their eyes and not care because that's actually not really the case. He didn't commit a felony, even though he's accused of that. There was no federal law he broke. But anyway, the issue is that it expedites it forces the Supreme Court to look at it sooner, much sooner than later. It's actually kind of a good thing. The best thing would be they block it, which I think they're leaning towards, but I think there's a chance that they could simply allow the sentencing and then look at it and overturn the verdict entirely. 100% when they look at the verdict, it'll be overturned. Might even be unanimous.
Defending the Court of Appeals judgment, and I do think that there are layered safeguards that the court can take into account that will ameliorate concerns about unduly chilling presidential conduct.
There's a possibility that a higher court in New York could just overturn the verdict also, just to circumvent the embarrassment of the Supreme Court overturning the verdict. I love that's a great point in the comment section in the live chat. I love when Democrats say, "Here we go again. He's above the law." It's like, no, you don't get to decide what the law is because it suits you politically. The law should not be used to further the interests of the Democratic Party. The law should be used to protect Americans, to protect people. Okay? It doesn't protect anyone, doesn't help anybody to accuse Trump of things he didn't do, and then bemoan the fact that he wasn't convicted because the man's innocent, but you seem to think that he's guilty of something, or a wonderful, morally superior liberal Democrat seems to think he's guilty of something simply because a state unilaterally took it upon itself to decide that he committed he broke a federal law, when the DOJ and the FEC said no, he didn't, and dropped the case. State doesn't have the right to do that. It's completely unconstitutional. But then you have also the presidential immunity victory. I mean, just constant winning with Trump. It's unbelievable.
that concerns us. We are not endorsing a regime that we think would expose former presidents to criminal prosecution in bad faith, for political animus, without adequate evidence. A politically driven prosecution would violate the Constitution under Waite versus United States. It's not something within the arsenal of prosecutors to do. Prosecutors take an oath, the Attorney General takes an oath. So I don't want to overstate Your Honor's concern with potentially relying solely on good faith. But that's an ingredient, and then the courts stand ready to adjudicate motions based on selective prosecution, political animus. This court
what's been taking place against Trump is the definition of selective prosecution. He wasn't even level defined. It was the Democrats who were level defined. Why didn't they get indicted for this? Because it's selective prosecution.
Relied on those very protections in the Vance case just 2 years ago.
But what concerns me is, as you know, the Court of Appeals did not get into a focused consideration of what acts we're talking about or what documents we're talking about because of its adoption of what you termed, and I agree quite correctly, as a tautological statement, because the fact of prosecution was enough to take away any official immunity, the fact of prosecution. They had no need to look at what courts normally look at when you're talking about a privilege or immunity question.
Well, I think I would take issue, Mr. Chief Justice, with the idea of taking away immunity. There is no immunity that is in.
Nixon v. Fitzgerald gave presidents immunity from civil, and up until recently, it was believed criminal. Now we know official acts are immune from criminal charges.
In the Constitution, unless this court creates it today, there certainly is no textual immunity. We do not submit that that's the end of the story. United States versus Nixon wasn't a textually based case. Neither was Nixon versus Fitzgerald. We endorse both of those holdings. But what is important is that no public official has ever had the kind of absolute criminal immunity that my friend speaks of, even with respect to the speech or debate clause. It's very narrow. It's focused on legislative acts. It's not focused on everything that a congressman does. And it responds to a very specific historical circumstance that basically involved the two other branches potentially harassing legislators and preventing them from doing their jobs. That's why it ended up in the Constitution. Nothing like that ended up in the Constitution for the presidents. And that's because one of the chief concerns of
So, of course, it was the Supreme Court gave Trump immunity. This is really interesting. This is... Okay, hold on. This is Alito. Where's Samuel Alito? Well, let's listen to the presidential immunity victory really quickly.
Sorry to cut you off. We're going back to Lydia. We have a ruling on immunity. Lydia, what do you got?
Yeah, Ash, this is the big one we've had all eyes on right now. We're getting this just in. Former President Donald Trump from the Supreme Court of the United States does have immunity, and it appears that the decision is limited to his official acts. Remember, a big question after the lower courts in the District of Columbia decided that the former president had no immunity across the board. Would the Supreme Court come back and say, wait a second, we can so-called split the baby? He has immunity for some acts, not others. Official acts, perhaps, not immunity for unofficial acts. Again, Ash, we're just getting this opinion in from the Supreme Court of the United States, but it does appear at this moment that former President Donald Trump, they have decided he would have immunity for official acts that he carried out. So now what would happen is that the case would be remanded back down to the lower courts. The lower court trial judges would read this opinion, and they would have to decide what happened around the events of January 6th that would qualify as an official act such that President Trump would have immunity from the prosecution brought by special counsel Jack Smith.
So, of course, an official act is a speech. An official act is speaking to Hope Hicks as president. And simply saying, well, Hope Hicks was possibly listening to somebody committing a crime. It's like, you don't know that. There's no proof of that. The conversations that a president has with an advisor is almost always classified. Okay? You would go to jail or prison immediately if you just took a tape recorder and taped a private conversation with President Obama while he was president. With Trump, maybe not so much. I mean, yes, with Trump also. But I mean, the media would say, "Oh my God, it's totally fine." But if you tape recorded a president in an official setting or even an unofficial setting, and you were that's a classified discussion. You would go to prison immediately. But here, this is interesting.
Tear up your car insurance bill and try this instead. I used to let them raise my car insurance every year until I...
Really, I mean, the presidents have to make a lot of tough decisions about...
This is Samuel Alito. I'm telling you, when it gets to the second it gets to the Supreme Court, it'll be at least 6-3, possibly unanimous decision overturning the verdict.
Really, I mean, the presidents have to make a lot of tough decisions about enforcing the law, and they have to make decisions about questions that are unsettled, and they have to make...
By the way, thank you for the kind words, everybody, and thank you for subscribing, and thank you also for resubscribing if you had to resubscribe. And I am really blessed to have such an amazing, awesome, intelligent, educated, wonderful group of viewers around the world and in the U.S. Thank you so much. Let's continue.
Decisions based on the information that's available. Do you really, did I understand you to say, well, you know, if he makes a mistake, he makes a mistake. He's subject to the criminal laws just like anybody else? You don't think he's in a peculiarly precarious position?
He's in a special position for a number of reasons. One is that he has access to legal...
He was in a special position as president, and all presidents have been treated with a certain amount of respect, but he's Trump, so we're just going to accuse him of everything under the sun and make really absurd leaps of logic and convince morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrats that Trump is an actual menace to society, when in fact we're just going to accuse him of things we would never accuse Democrats of. For example, that entire summer, his last year in office, we had billions upon billions of dollars in property damage throughout the country. Things were being torched, lives were being lost, and Democrats either stood silent or, with their words, fomented, possibly, can we use the word incited, a tremendous amount of mayhem and chaos. Chuck Schumer utilized very threatening statements against Brett Kavanaugh, and then right after, a deranged person tried to take Kavanaugh's life. So, do you think that Jack Smith would indict and try to imprison Schumer? I don't think so.
Legal advice about everything that he does. He's under a constitutional obligation he's supposed to be faithful to the laws of the United States and the Constitution of the United States. And making a mistake is not what lands you in a criminal prosecution. There's been some talk about the statutes that are issued in this case. I think they are fairly described as malum in se statutes, engaging in conspiracies to defraud the United States with respect to one of the most important functions, namely the certification of the next president.
Well, I don't want to dispute that particular application of 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, to the particular facts here, but would you not agree that that is a peculiarly open-ended statutory prohibition, in that fraud under that provision, unlike under...
The legal counsel for Jack Smith, the malum in se Latin phrase that refers to an act that is wrong in itself. It is a criminal law concept that describes an act that is inherently immoral and illegal because it violates the natural, moral, and public principles of a civilized society. What on earth did Trump say that violated the natural, moral, and public principles? Democrats themselves removed Biden. It only took them less than 4 years. Did they engage in malum say criminal violations by ousting a man who actually won their primary? I don't get it. How can they have the Democratic Party, media, wonderful, morally superior, highly educated liberals have done a great job infusing sensibilities that are leveled only one way. They're never incensed or outraged when, for example, Biden is accused of literally what's in the Access Hollywood tape, where Trump was talking on a hot mic. Biden was literally accused of doing something infinitely more criminal and heinous and atrocious by a human being. He was leveled the accusation. You think Democrats care? There were essentially hit pieces written trying to scrutinize the life of the woman who claimed that Biden had done that. But that's the way they roll. Their reaction to Biden's the accusations against Biden is a malum say egregious conduct. But anyway, let's continue.
Most other fraud provisions doesn't require any impairment of a property interest.
It's designed to protect the functions of the United States government, and it's difficult to think of a more critical function than the certification of who won the election.
Yeah, I'm not, as I said, I'm not discussing the particular facts of this case, but it applies to any fraud that interferes seriously with any government operation, right?
So what the government needs to show is an intent to impede, interfere, or defeat a lawful government function by deception, and it has to be done with.
How did Trump impede anything? He had the right to speak. He had the right to give a speech. He didn't tell anybody to commit a crime. Democrats made the absurd leap of logic. He spoke, therefore his speech directly led to people committing crimes. No, it didn't. There was not a shred of evidence that anything was orchestrated or planned. Even the Federal Bureau of Investigation, leveled always against Trump, stated there was no plot or anything. They couldn't find anything.
With C-Enter. These are not the kinds of activities that I think any of us would think a president needs to engage in order to fulfill his Article 2 duties, and particularly in a case like this one. I want to pick up on something that the court said earlier about the distinction between a public official acting to achieve public ends and a public official acting to achieve private ends. As applied to this case, the president has no functions with respect to the certification of the winner of the presidential election. It seems likely that the framers designed the Constitution that way because at the time of the founding, presidents had no two-term limit. They could run again and again, and were expected potentially to want to do that. So the potential for self-interest would explain why the states conduct the elections. They send electors to certify who won those elections and to provide votes, and then Congress in a extraordinary joint session certifies the vote. And the president doesn't have an official role in that proceeding. So it's difficult for me to understand how there could be a serious constitutional question about saying you can't use fraud to defeat that function.
He wasn't using fraud to defeat any function. Sadly for the country, we had 4 years of, we're ending 4 years of Biden. He was ousted by his own political party. Democrats said he won their primary and then promptly ousted them in the typical, completely illogical and irrational Democratic Party primary protocol. The protocol for the Democratic primary is whatever happens, happens, and just deal with it. That's their protocol. But he didn't tell anyone to do anything. he performed a speech, and then they made the absurd leap of logic that he lied in his speech. Well, Democrats lie all the time. Presidents, Republicans have lied. Bush, President Obama, Clinton, Biden recently saying that he'd stay in the presidential contest. They made they say that Trump lied a lot. He didn't. He was the most honest president. What they did was, in a petulant manner, try to eviscerate every single thing he said in this philosophy of language course. If Trump said we had a great economy, they'd say, 3.765789 Pinocchios. We don't have a great economy. We have a very good economy. In fact, some people say it's a bad economy. And we had a better economy in the 50s. Trump. Lie. One of his 50,000 lies. That's what they would do. Meanwhile, Clinton, she's like, oh, I have private service for yoga. Oh, okay. That's fine. Biden is, I'm stepping down, man, for the good of the country, man. Come on, man. Or I'm staying, man. I'm going to fight and stay against Trump, man. No, is that a lie, a truth? But the Washington Post apparently didn't care that Biden lied for 3 weeks, stating that he would stay, and then, only to step down because he was forced to. Oh, then they said it was for the good of the country. Then they said he was heroic. What greater lie is that? He was forced out, and I think today he said he would have won.
You can't obstruct it through deception. You can't deprive millions of voters of their right to have their vote counted for the candidate who they chose.
He didn't deprive anyone of anything. He tried through legal means to contest. If you want to use the word overturn, but you can whatever word you want. He tried through legal means to contest what he thought was a very criminal and flawed process. Simply saying, it was a pristine beyond recognition. It was so pristine. How dare he? It's like, well, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He doesn't believe you. He's suspicious of you. Just like most Americans. So, deal with it. And then he won the popular vote, and then Biden was ousted less than 4 years later. By the way, the most popular candidate of all time. That shouldn't give you any, food for thought or moment to pause in terms of well, wait, what's going on here?
Thank you, counsel. Justice Thomas? Justice Alito?
Could we just briefly review the layers of protection that you think exists? And I'm going to start with what the D.C. Circuit said. So the first layer of protection is that attorneys general and other Justice Department attorneys can be trusted to act in a professional and ethical manner, right?
Yes.
How robust is that protection?
So, ladies and gentlemen, Trump won the popular vote with practically 99% negative media coverage from essentially activists who masquerade as journalists. He won the popular vote. Say it 1,000 times, everybody. He won every single battleground state. Harris did not even win one battleground state. He won the Senate. He kept the House. He won the presidency. He's back, baby. This convicted felon. Oh my God. He's a convicted felon. He's a terrible human being. Oh my God. He's worked for the Kremlin. He's worked for the Kremlin. And he's back. Literally everything Democrats have stated is either false, misleading, information that misinforms, the most apoplectic, absurd leaps of logic. He said a speech. He performed a speech. Therefore, he tried to foment a rebellion. It's like, what? This would be completely outlandish 10 years ago. But now it's part of American politics, making absurd leaps of logic when it comes to Trump. Trump is we had a great economy, record low poverty. Fact, look it up. CNN, record low poverty. CNN, the trusted name in news, and New York Times, record highs in household median income. We had manufacturing jobs. It was awesome. We didn't have countries weren't invaded. under Trump's watch, but apparently, not so with wonderful Biden. But anyway, they ousted Biden. I thought that he was the most popular candidate of all time. Why did they oust him? Why did they oust Biden? Why did they oust Biden? Trump is like literally the most honest president we've ever had, which is why he won the popular vote. What he says, he means. He wants a wall. Okay, Democrats say, I want Medicare for all. They don't mean that. They lie through their teeth. Biden said, I'm staying in the contest. Why didn't he stay in the contest? Why didn't Biden stay in the presidential contest? I want to know. Oh, because Harris was better? Okay, then why didn't she win the primary? Why didn't Harris win the primary? Anyway, hit subscribe to this channel, ladies and gentlemen. God bless you all. I'll see you hopefully tonight. But ladies and gentlemen, huge history in the making. And what can I tell you? I love you. God bless you. To my super chat, thank you.